Hello and welcome to Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Thank you for joining us. I'm Councilmember Keith Powers and I represent New York City's District 4, covering the east side of Manhattan and Midtown with some of our city's greatest landmarks like Times Square, Grand Central Terminal, and the UN. I also serve as the chair of the City Council's Criminal Justice Committee. As a council member, I pay close attention to issues that impact our community and propose legislation to help improve the quality of life of New Yorkers. And we are well into 2019 as Senator Liz Krueger, who represents a majority of my district, the district I represent, just wrapped up a historic session of the state legislature in Albany. First elected to the New York State Senate in a special election in February 2002, Senator Krueger is currently the chair of the Senate Finance Committee. She's also a member of the Elections, Higher Education, Housing, Construction and Community Development, Mental Health and Development Disabilities, and Rules Committees. Senator Krueger is a strong advocate for tenants' rights, affordable housing, improved access to health care, more equitable funding for public education, and animal welfare. She has made reforming and modernizing New York State's government processes, electoral system, and tax policy central goals of her legislative agenda during her tenure. It has been a banner year for New York State, with the State Senate recently closing its session in Albany, and it is a great time to connect and catch up on all the issues that just happened in Albany. Thank you for joining us today, Senator.
Pleasure. Thank you, Keith.
So we want to start with just a few questions here today, but first of all, why don't you just give us your sort of initial reactions on what just happened in Albany in the past year? Really a banner year for all of you.
It really was. And for people who don't know, in the 2018 elections, the Democrats took the majority in the state Senate, a huge change, and a significant majority. So we went from being in the minority to having a 39-23 majority, and one of the Republican senators then quit her job midstream, so it was 39-22. So it gave us the opportunity to work on and pass legislation that nobody ever even imagined could pass the New York State Senate. I'm talking 30 years. Yeah. So, for example, I think what most people are aware of was when we did a huge reform of tenant protections, rent regulation, rent control. We also passed the strongest climate action plan of any state in the country, giving an outline for where New York State must and now legally has to go with reduction of our carbon footprint, massive increase in green energy, and hopefully, I say hopefully sincerely, putting us on the road to finally reverse the direction of climate change here in New York, being a leader of what we hope other states around the country will follow. But we made enormous progress. We had significant improvements in our criminal justice reform package during the budget package in April 1. I know something you were following so carefully. We made massive changes in court reform, election reform, child welfare policies. I sincerely haven't even been able to track all the bills that we were able to pass both houses. Of course, now we need the governor to sign many of those, although he already did sign the rent reform issues, in case people out there are worried at all. That bill has been signed.
I think he signed it right after you passed it.
Because we were at the deadline. June 15th would have been the sunset date, and we passed the new massive reforms on the 14th.
And that majority that you have obviously gives you an ability to look at issues that even if a few members have concerns or there's difficulty with it, and particularly in their districts, gives you an opportunity still to look at some big ticket items.
Exactly. We can allow people to vote no if they feel they have to. You need 32 votes to pass a bill in the New York State Senate. We have 39 Democrats. And it's a big state, and there's lots of differences of opinion. But one, we have that flexibility now. And two, we are working together extremely well as a conference, even when we don't all agree on everything.
I don't recall seeing many defections in terms of public defections from issues, maybe more private disagreements. In terms of rent regulation, I think many of the folks coming into the session both had really high hopes, and most were achieved. At the same time, a lot of skepticism because many people have been waiting for this moment for years and figured at some point it would fall off track, but what were your hopes in terms of rent regulation reform? And do you feel like it scaled up to the reality that you had going into? You've been working on this as long as anybody, I think, in the Senate.
Well, the truth is, I was drafted against my will to run for the state Senate so that we could take the majority, so we could address issues like the housing issues and other poor people's issues. I was doing anti-poverty work, running eviction prevention programs when I was convinced to run for the state Senate. So yes, I've been working on this a long time. And when you really dig into it, we addressed not 100% of the concerns people had, but I'd say 85% and across the board. So we ended deregulation. Right? We ended the high-end deregulation. We did away with the vacancy bonus, the longevity bonus. We scaled down radically what and when an IAI, individual apartment bonus, or an MCI, major capital improvement bonus, could be approved. We both scaled down how frequently you could apply, how much they could be, what were approvable activities, and it can never be more than a 2% increase on what people are paying for rent, and it's no longer part of your base rent. It's an assessment that is separate from, and that really matters when you calculate increases in rent. We don't sunset the law. That's perhaps the most important thing for people to understand. We've been playing this horrible game for decades. The rent regulation laws would come up for renewal every 4 to 5 years. This giant game of chicken would be played, where the Assembly, run by Democrats, would say, we need to do all these improvements. The Senate Republicans would say, we want it to sunset and end. And they'd play a chicken getting to that June 15th date about how much the Assembly would scale back trying to do anything in exchange for the Republicans not letting the whole set of laws end completely. We changed the rules of the road because this bill doesn't sunset. That doesn't mean laws don't change. You and I are in the business of writing new laws, but it means there will never be this game of chicken again with a deadline and people's lives, as far as they're concerned, their ability to stay in their homes, hanging in the balance on the date of June 14th. So it's an enormous win.
I always felt like that was just such an interesting process. You're talking about making the rent laws permanent. Every year we have to go and figure out exactly how much you're going to pay. And I know I get constituents who ask me, should I sign a 1-year lease or a 2-year lease? I wonder if anybody's ever talked about whether to figure out a system around how to do rent increases differently than playing this 1 year by 1 year gamble. That's heavily political too in terms of who's the mayor.
There's been limitations about what the city thought it could do because it knew it was facing a hostile Albany when it came to housing policy. And we'd also set laws that said, New York City, you can't supersede what the state's decided to do. And so that also has really, I think, tied the hands of local government. So one of the bills I carried for years was Erstat repeal, which was basically a law that says, well, it was a law that took power away from the city council and city government and sent it to Albany. And so for years I carried a bill that says, okay, let's just give it back to New York City. Let New York City make the decisions about New York City housing. Why should Albany decide that? Some people were saying that's the only thing you should do this year, just do Erstat repeal. And I took the position, we didn't want the laws to be sunsetting, there to be an empty space while the city of New York said, okay, now we're going to take it back and figure out what we want to make the design of the plan. But now that we've put in radically better housing law, if the city of New York comes to us next year and says, we really want Erstat repeal, we think we're better off doing it alone, I'm certainly open to that discussion. If you come to us and say, we have tax abatement programs that are spending enormous amounts of our property taxes, 421A, J51, but aren't getting us that much affordable housing, we couldn't do any better in the old Albany. We actually think we've got much better ideas about how the city of New York, property taxes should be used as abatements and credits and deductions to get us maximum affordable housing. our ears are open. You all should come up with your suggestions.
We'll be talking soon. What were any big surprises in terms of the session? Anything that you were most surprised about at the end of the day? Happened, didn't happen, or just a dynamic?
Sure. I mean, there are plenty of things that didn't happen. I'm the lead sponsor on the marijuana legalization bill, and I tried to get that across the line several times this year and just missed. I will get it across the line, I believe, next year, but we did part of it. So we decided to pull out at the last minute some of the decriminalization and expungement of records section of the bill. And the decriminalization doesn't go far enough because decriminalization doesn't work unless you have a legal market. So we need the legal market. But we did the expungement of records, which means we're going to be expunging the criminal records of an estimated 300,000 New Yorkers who only have criminal records because they were busted on low-level personal use marijuana. And that's huge when you think about the fact that if you have a criminal record, there are certain kinds of jobs you can't apply for, certain kinds of housing you can't live in, certain kinds of educational aid you're not eligible for. These are all disproportionately records of young men and women who are black and brown. Mm-hmm. And so it is added significantly to the inequitable treatment of people of color within the criminal justice system and disadvantaged them economically in our economy and society. So I think that's huge in its own right. And then we also, less relevant for New York City, took the section of my bill that legalized and clarified the agricultural hemp industry opportunities, including regulation of production of CBD. Now, almost every New Yorker will know what CBD is now, even though 4 years ago, 0 New Yorkers knew what CBD is. They're in drugstores, they're on everything, people are taking it. The feds have said, it's safe. It's only legal in a regulated market. No state has created a regulated market. So all of that's what's being sold is illegal, but even drugstore chains are selling it. Now in New York, we will be making sure if you're buying something called CBD, that's what it actually is. You will see dosage information. The manufacturing process will have to be safe because the manufacturing can actually be chemically toxic. Mm. We don't want that. Mm. So we will actually have standards for a regulated market, I think, again, first in the country. So even though I'm telling you that's one of the big issues I think I only halfway got there on, we got halfway there in some really important ways.
And I think sometimes you're setting up the conversation and some breaking down some of the barriers mm-hmm. leading into the next session and setting up the time to figure out the remaining issues. Just wanted to focus, you are now the Finance Committee Chair, very important position in terms of the budget process in New York State and the State Senate. Tell us about your first budget. And how do you feel about being the finance chair? I know probably pretty excited and happy being in that role, but any particular challenges or surprises as you took over?
So it's an enormous amount of responsibility and enormous amount of work, and I'm very honored that my leader, Andre Stewart-Cousins, gave me that responsibility. So first it means sitting through, 100 hours of public hearings from people from around the state on budget issues. It involves attempting to get clarification about what the governor has put in his budget, represent your conference in negotiations with the Assembly on things that we will right away accept or reject in the governor's budget, and go into three-way negotiations with the executive, the Assembly, and the Senate. One of the things that frustrates me, and I knew it in advance, but then I got to see it up close, how little power the legislature actually has in the New York State budget process. It's sort of set up and designed to be almost 95% controlled by the governor. And I actually think that power is too great. There were some court cases that were lost where it was determined that's how the Constitution should be read. I think the court cases were wrong. I'm exploring whether we should be amending the Constitution or re-challenging the cases, because I do respect why you want an executive to have a significant role in the budget process, but I don't think anybody ever envisioned it would be such an imbalance as it is in New York. So I would say budget process is very frustrating to me for all the things that I thought we could and should do. So we can cut things out of the governor's budget. We can't add things to the budget, and that's not an even playing field.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we're excited, and I think that it is clear to most New Yorkers that things have actually really changed up in Albany, and with partners in the Assembly, the Senate now is able to pass all the things that you and others have been talking about for decades and years, and things that many of us have been hoping for. So thank you, and congratulations on a very successful session, and your first as a finance chair, but getting to be able to work on some historic laws in Albany that will help, I know, both of our shared constituents and certainly many of mine who that Stuyvesant and Peter Cooper when you talk about rent regulations as well. So we're going to take a short break and then continue our discussion with a shift to the other body of the state legislature when we have Assemblymember Dick Gottfried joining us. Well, thank you for tuning in to Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Be back shortly. Thank you for tuning in to Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Assemblymember Gottfried represents the 75th Assembly District, covering Chelsea, Hell's Kitchen, Murray Hill, Midtown, and part of the Lincoln Center area in Manhattan. We share a representation of quite a few neighborhoods. First elected to office in 1971, Assemblymember Gottfried is the longest-serving member of the New York State Assembly, and he is a member of the committees on higher education, the Majority Steering Committee, the Rules, but most importantly serves as the chair of the Health Committee and the chair of the Assembly's Manhattan delegation. He's been the chair of the Health Committee since 1987 and is leading leading state health policymaker, not just here in New York, but also nationally, which we'll talk about a little bit. Assemblymember Gottfried has made health-related issues a center of his legislative agenda and has been the leading representative on patient autonomy, reproductive freedom, as well as fighting to protect and increase funding for Medicaid, school health clinics, HIV/AIDS services, and other health-related services. Over the years, the Assemblymember has been responsible for the passage of many bills that provide low or no-cost health insurance coverage to those New Yorkers who need it most. Assemblymember Godfrey, thank you for joining us today on the heels of a wonderful legislative session. Thanks for being here. Now you have a new state Senate Democratic majority who can help you pass a number of issues that you've been working on, I know, for a long time.
Yeah.
Any big accomplishments that you are most proud of this legislative session?
Where to start? I mean, there's just such a long list of them. And it was an amazing year. This was really the first time since the mid-'60s that we have had a working Democratic majority, both in the Assembly and in the state Senate, and having the Assembly and Senate and governor in Democratic hands. I don't think that's happened since the 1930s. And so we made enormous progress on the rent laws. Our climate change legislation is just amazing, the commitments and the structure that it has put us in place on. Criminal justice reform, getting rid of cash bail for the vast majority of offenses, enacting gender, my bill to extend the human rights law to transgender people. I mean, I could go on and on. Driver's licenses for immigrants, gun control, strengthening our gun laws, which are already the strongest in the country. So we've just done some really amazing things. Obviously, we've got more to do. Otherwise we'd all have to get reelected just on the basis of charm. The New York Health Act, my bill to create a single-payer system, I am hoping will be center stage in the 2020 session, working with State Senator Gustavo Rivera, who's my Senate counterpart on the Health Committee, to get that done, and we can talk more about that. One of the big disappointments, of course, as Liz Krueger was saying, is the fact that adult use of marijuana did not become law. Very close, but close only counts in horseshoes, and we're going to work hard to get that done next year.
Yeah, and I want to talk about single payer because this has obviously been now central to the debate in the 2020 election amongst the Democratic candidates. We've seen debates already where candidates are discussing their vision for health care, and I would argue that both it's probably the English issue that has the most difference between candidates in terms of how far they're willing to go on coverage, but also really, I think, an important issue for many of the voters when they talk about their own personal health care and the future of this country's healthcare system. You've been talking about this much longer. One wonders why you're not on stage as one of the 28th or 30th candidate. But
you don't want me running for president.
But
no.
I wanted to just ask you about that. To me, the shift in the conversation is happening around healthcare.
Yes.
You've been talking about this for a long time.
Yep.
In addition to your hopes for what happens in this state, particularly, and certainly we could be a leader, how do you feel the debate is going right now in the Democratic Party around health care, and what are your hopes in that conversation as we enter 2020? Because your legislation, as we noted, will be, we think, in discussion at the same time in this national conversations going on.
Well, first of all, if we elect a Democratic president and a Democratic U.S. Senate, and they're committed to single-payer coverage, and it becomes federal legislation instead of my bill, I will be the happiest camper there could be. What I appreciate about the national debate going on is that for the first time there really is an articulated debate between people who believe, as I do, that we have to have a single-payer system, that's really the only thing that can work so that every American can get the health care they need without financial obstacles and hardships, and those who say, well, why don't we just offer that to people and make that an option. I think the idea of making it an option really can't come close to working. And that's partly because in order to get the savings to deliver full coverage to everyone without deductibles and copays and the like, you need the savings that come from getting insurance companies out of the way and simultaneously lowering the administrative costs of doctors and hospitals. As long as you've got a multiple payer system, you can't get those savings. And if you can't get those savings, you can't get there from here. So I'm happy that issue is coming to the fore, and I think Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Mayor de Blasio, who supports my New York Health Act, by the way, I think have it exactly right. That a single-payer system, whether we do it nationally or at the state level, is really the only way to make healthcare a real human right.
And the conversation around, I think there was a debate even the other night about why should I lose my private health care because somebody else wants. I think one of the candidates raised that.
Well, if you have a job, if you're an assistant manager, and the boss comes to you and says, "I'd like to make you the manager," do you say, "Oh my God, I'm getting fired"? No, you're not getting fired as an assistant manager. You're getting promoted. And if you've been making $10 an hour and we raise the minimum wage to $15, nobody says, "Oh my God, I'm losing my $10 paycheck." No, you're getting more. There is no New Yorker, except maybe Mike Bloomberg, who will have better health coverage today than they will get under the New York Health Act. The New York Health Act covers home health care, covers just about every health benefit you can imagine, covers it without deductibles or copays or restricted provider networks. Like I say, if you're a billionaire, you don't need New York Health, but everybody else does.
And would it restrict private insurance or ban private insurance?
Well, it would outlaw private insurance that duplicates any benefit of the New York Health Act. If some insurance company can find something that New York Health doesn't cover, and I don't know what that might be, they could offer coverage for that. One reason why it's important to rule out private coverage, partly it's for the savings that come from the efficiency of a single payer. But secondly, what's important to making sure that the coverage will be as high quality as possible is that if every voter and people with wealth and power are benefiting from the system and are committed to the system, that's how you make sure it will take care of everyone. If the governor, if every legislator, if all of our friends and family are in the program, we're all going to have a stake in making sure it's as good as can be.
I always say, as legislators particularly have to be part of it because we have to make the laws.
Yep.
And I always say, if you don't ride the subway, you don't know how to fix it.
Exactly.
Those types of things. And what do you see as the other, and maybe as we look ahead beyond this debate, as we talk about other healthcare issues that you feel like should be in the forefront of the conversation? Maybe it's for the 2028 state presidential debates, or even right now in New York State? What are issues that you feel like we're not discussing enough around when we talk about healthcare, access to healthcare, and improving the system?
Well, expanding the medical marijuana program, which I passed the legislation that created it 5 years ago. It needs to be expanded. We came close to doing that this year, but as with adult use, it didn't quite cross the finish line. We're going to be working on doing that. You know, New York distributes billions of dollars in what is called indigent care funding to hospitals to help pay for the care for people who don't have insurance but are still pretty poor. We do not distribute that money very fairly. We distribute a lot of it to hospitals that do very little indigent care, and a lot of hospitals that really do care for a lot of poor people get the short end of the stick. We're going to be trying to redistribute that money better. And every year we also fight to try to protect more of the rights of people on Medicaid to not lose their benefits, to and not have fewer problems getting enrolled and re-enrolled, et cetera.
Just moving into more of, as I'm watching the world around us change in terms of people's use of technology, and even healthcare seems to be being delivered. I mean, not even just in the ZocDocs of the world where you can just find a doctor so much easier, but it seems like long term, there will be more options, and the city will have to start, or the state either will have to start regulating this in new ways. We talk about doctors and access to doctors and things. Has the state looked at all around what the future might hold in terms of advances in terms of access to whether it's using your iPhone in order to get advice on in terms of a particular issue? But I mean, there just seems to be vast opportunities here. Where does the conversation lie around what the future might hold?
Well, New York has actually been pretty out front on making sure that health coverage, whether it's Medicaid or commercial health coverage, is now obligated to cover telehealth services on the same basis as any other service. And in many parts of the state, that's particularly important, that you're able to consult a world-class specialist, even if you live in Plattsburgh or even smaller communities. And we've made a lot of progress on that. We have a pretty good system of interoperable electronic health records systems. I know a lot of doctors and others, are having a hard time with a lot of the electronic health records system. They find it, maddening to deal with. And so I think we need to try to help develop more human-friendly electronic health record systems and protect providers in those systems, and protect the privacy of individuals' health records within those systems. And we've made some pretty good progress on that. Like I think a lot of communities, we've been slow in getting a lot of that implemented because you're changing some generations old built-in habits of people.
Yeah. Well, our time is already up, and I always enjoy talking with you because you are, to me, one of the smartest people when we talk about healthcare in this country, and you've been doing this for a very long time. And the conversation that's happening now in this country is certainly due to the work that many people put in years ahead to get this conversation shifted. So thank you again for joining us today, and
glad to be with you.
And congratulations on a really successful legislative session that I
you.
know you and others have been waiting for a very long time to get.
Elections do make a difference.
Elections matter. I want to thank both Senator Liz Krueger and Assemblymember Gottfried for great conversations here today. I am Councilmember Keith Powers, and I look forward to seeing you in the neighborhood.